Okay, um, what we're going to do here is I created a video to try to show you um, what it is I would do in class with the students. This chapter is a little more difficult than some of the others to do without some interactive stuff. So I've never actually done a video like this before, so bear with me. Hopefully it works. I've been working on getting the technology set up, so that's why it's a little bit late. But you should have been able to download this document right here. If you haven't yet, Microsoft Word is stopping, so that's not cool, as you probably can see. Here it is. I got it back. So it looks something like this, and if you haven't downloaded it yet, okay, so we're on the home screen of our Principles of Microeconomics, and you won't have access to this stuff yet. I haven't opened it yet. I will here as soon as I get this video done. If you click on Chapter 8 here, this first one, click here for practice number 1 for perfect competition production decisions, and then obviously this video is right below it. So if you're watching the video, make sure you click here. It's going to download a Word document. Looks like this, and by itself it looks fairly complicated and would probably be pretty hard to calculate on your own. So I'm going to walk you through it, and then I'm going to put out some practice ones with the correct answers, and then after you get those, then I encourage you all to go take a stab at some of the assignments. I'm going to try to get another video posted either tonight yet or tomorrow at some point that kind of walks through graphs and that type of stuff. But I roll everything into Excel because it's just going to make things a lot simpler on calculating. A couple of things that we need to talk about first is what we're looking at here. We're looking at an industry that is perfectly competitive. There are 4 types of industry structures, really. There's perfect competition, there's monopoly. Right, monopoly is going to have, if you've all played the game Monopoly, mono means one, monopoly means there's one firm in an industry, so one firm controls an industry. There's an oligopoly, and we're going to discuss all of these market structures more in detail next week. Oligopoly, if you have ever heard the term of an oligarchy, where a handful of people have control of a country or a government. Oligopoly is the same way. A handful of businesses have control over the marketplace. And then the last one we look at is a mouthful. It's called monopolistic competition. Okay, and it evidently didn't all fit on there, and I don't know why. There we go. And monopolistic competition is kind of like your standard industries that most of us purchase things from. Restaurants. The idea of monopolistic competition is you can make your product just a little bit different than everyone else's, which means you have a little bit of control over price. Okay, and that's the main idea here with perfect competition. It probably starts off with number 1, and that's the idea that there's a lot of buyers and sellers in the market. Whenever there's a lot of buyers and sellers in the market is going to dictate price. And like I said, I'll try to put a video up here later today or tomorrow that kind of illustrates that idea. The second thing that perfect competition does is the suppliers in the market produce identical products. And I spelled identical wrong, I just realized. I don't like that. They produce homogeneous products, so they're the same. So I can't make my product any different than yours. Okay. The third thing is there have to be no barriers to entry, or there can't be any barriers to entry, which basically means it's really easy for someone to get into this industry and start producing a product for that industry. And then the last one, there has to be perfect information, which is probably the toughest of the 3 to describe. Basically, perfect information means everyone has access to all the information in that market. So we know how many buyers there are, we know how many sellers, we know what costs are, we know what supply and demand are doing. We have access to all that information, so we can make smart decisions about the business. To be right honest, this idea of perfect competition, as a friend of mine says, exists in the real world somewhere between very, very rarely and never. The best example of perfect competition is going to be production agriculture, and that's because the idea mainly of number one and number two. There are a lot of buyers and sellers, and we're producing pretty much the same products. There really are some barriers to entry into farming even. High capital costs a lot to secure land, to buy equipment, that type of stuff. And we really don't have perfect information in that market. My background and training is ag economics, and I teach a lot of ag economic courses. So I really try to, really push on my students that, hey, this microeconomic stuff is extremely important for us, and you got to understand what it is we're trying to look at, what it is we're trying to do. One of the other things that becomes incredibly important about the idea of perfect competition is, since it's identical products and since there's a whole bunch of buyers and sellers, we go back to the perfectly elastic demand curve. All right, and what that meant is, let me just type in something real quick. The demand for our product never changes. Okay, and so if you look here, at every doesn't matter how much of the product we sell, the price is $100. Okay, and so the idea here is this: if you bring in, here we're selling firewood. If you kind of read into the problem here, okay, we're selling firewood. Notice firewood production per day, and we're assuming this is going to be a perfectly competitive industry, by the way. All right. And so if you are able to sell 5 loads of firewood or 5 cords of firewood in the market today, it's going to bring $100. And if you can bring 11, each one of those 11 is going to bring $100. And if you can bring 13, each one of those 13 is going to bring $100. The reason you can't charge $120 for your firewood is because there's a whole bunch of people buying and selling this product, and the people that are selling it are selling the same thing. So if the market says the price is $100, and you try to sell your product for $120, since everyone else that's producing firewood has the same thing, customers are just going to go and purchase it from them for $100. One of the key tenets of perfect competition, a lot of buyers and sellers, means you have no price control. You do not get to control the price of the product. You have to take whatever the market is bearing today. And that's another idea we'll look at a little deeper when we look at the graphs in the next video. Okay, so we've got to bear in mind, we've got this marginal revenue curve that's a flat line at $100. You can see here when I entered in the marginal revenue, which we're going to explain here in a second, again, we've got a flat line up here. So that's kind of what it is we're trying to describe, and what we're trying to tell people with this this idea is, you get $100 for each cord of firewood that you sell. Okay. The first couple columns here, so marginal product, total fixed cost, total variable cost, and really marginal cost. And then again, average fixed cost, average variable cost, average total cost. We kind of looked at in the last chapter. So some of this stuff's going to be review. Remember, marginal product is the marginal product. When we calculate marginal product, we're looking at the change. Let's see here. How could I write this? Change in total output divided by the change in input. Okay, so I went ahead and wrote it up here. If you need to write down the formula, I'll try to write it down here, and then I'm going to delete it, and then we'll actually do the calculation. I'm going to do things a little different using Excel. Obviously, there is no marginal product when you don't produce anything. Again, we're looking at producing firewood. So we've got the number of employees. So this is how many laborers or employees we're going to hire. And then this is the amount of cords which is a unit of firewood production, basically a truckload of firewood. This is the amount of cords of firewood that we'll be able to produce given this amount of employees. So we calculate marginal product. We're looking at how much product did that extra employee add to the business. So here we're looking at change in total product of 5 from 0, and we're going to divide that by change of employees from 1 from 0. Okay, and so we get a marginal product of 5. And then we add the second employee and we get a marginal product of 6, okay, because it increased from 5 cords of firewood to 11. Add the third and we get a marginal product of 2, and then 1, and then 1, and then the last guy doesn't bring us anything. We know enough, the whole purpose of this assignment is profit maximization. Okay. We know enough right now to know that we are probably not going to hire the 6th employee or the 7th employee. Okay, we know that because they're not adding. Well, I shouldn't even say the 7th. We know we're not going to add the 6th employee because he's adding nothing to the business. But if you look on your worksheet, here we got to pay him $20 an hour or $8 or for 8 hours a day, so $160 per day. And I do have that information over here in this chart. I got $160 I got to pay this person, and he adds nothing to the business. So we know this much is true. We're not going to hire this 6th employee. Okay. Total fixed cost is a pretty simple one. It's going to be whatever our fixed costs. We got fixed costs of $75 per day. Those would be things like the cost of the equipment, the log splitter, the chainsaw, the trucks. We probably have to lease some ground, or we own some wooded areas that we're able to go and cut firewood on. We got to have a storage lot where we can store it so people can come and pick it up. Maybe we have to lease that. So the $75 a day are those costs for those types of pieces of equipment that we're going to need, and different, the land and capital that we're going to need. Variable costs, right? Calculating variable costs. We're obviously not going to calculate any variable costs here because we're not producing anything. Variable costs are dependent on total production or quantity. We will be incurring variable costs once we hire the first employee. And if you look over here, we've got variable costs. We've got chainsaw. That would be the fuel, oil, chains, sharpening the chains, any of that kind of any costs associated with chainsaw. I tried to make this as simple as possible to highlight some of the ideas that we're going to look at. So don't read into it too deeply, and just kind of bear along. We're making a bunch of assumptions, and that's one of them is that for every time you cut a cord of firewood, you're going to have $12.45 in costs related to it, related to the chainsaw. So I'm going to say, all right, take the chainsaw costs and multiply it by the number of cords of firewood. All right, and I do that because if you notice on the worksheet, it says variable cost chainsaw $12.45 per cord, and transportation $6.95 per cord. Labor is going to be $20 an hour, 8 hours a day, or $160 per employee per day, and then fixed costs at $75 a day. Okay. Then I need to add the transportation costs, so fuel and that type of stuff in the truck. I got transportation costs of $6.95 a day, or per cord times 5 cords. And then I also need to add the cost of labor. And so I'm paying $160 a day, and here I've got 1 employee. Okay. I hit enter, and I'm going to have total variable costs of $257 each day for 1 employee. If I add a second, it increases to $533, $732.20, $911.60, and so on and so forth. So you can see the variable costs start to increase quite rapidly. total cost, the calculation for total cost is simply total fixed cost plus the total variable cost. So I'm adding the two of those. All right. And so those are the cost calculations that I get. Marginal cost, if you remember marginal cost, the definition for marginal cost is change in total cost divided by change in output. Okay? Or it could be change in total variable cost or total cost. Either or works. The reason is the only difference between this number, oops, let's delete that and take this back to normal size. The only difference between this number and this number is $75, which happens to be the same difference between this number, and that's because we've got $75 in fixed costs. Okay, so since the calculation is change in total cost, so I'm at $332 in total cost now. When I had 0 employees hired, I had $75 in total cost. And then divide that by the amount of output. So the change in output, I'm producing 5 units or cords of firewood now, whereas before when I had no one hired, I produced 0 cords of firewood. That's saying $51.40 is my marginal cost. All right, now here's one of the keys to all of this. The term marginal, I'm going to do this here. The term marginal means additional. Okay? And so what we're looking at, we look at marginal cost. It's saying each one of these 5 cords of firewood that I produce with 1 employee, each one adds an additional $51.40 in costs. Okay? And so if I come down here and just do a real quick, got to take $51.40 times $5. Notice I've got $257, which was the amount of my variable costs. The reason it's the total change in variable costs is because remember I got to pay fixed costs regardless, so that gets discounted out of there. I'm going to get rid of that because that kind of messes some stuff up. If I built my formula right, I should be able to just go ahead and scroll down. Notice what I'm able to do. I drop marginal cost actually decreases when I add the second employee, and that's because he's more efficient. Not him himself, it's just the fact that now that there are 2 employees, I get to take advantage of specialization. And when they specialize, we increase production. And now all of a sudden, this 1 employee doesn't have to cut the firewood, stack the firewood, load it on a truck, haul it, unload it, stack it where it goes. Now all of a sudden, this guy can work on cutting, and this guy can work on loading, hauling, and unloading. Okay. We even out the jobs, we increase production because of it. Okay. Notice though here we had the 3rd employee. We're running out of things for him to specialize in. Okay. And so we end up with we decreased, and now we're starting to increase, and that's because we're seeing diminishing marginal returns set in at the 3rd employee, or a level of 3 employees. Okay. And that's the idea of diminishing marginal returns, is the fact that when we add an employee, they increase production. We add a second, we increase production by even more. We add a third, we're still increasing production, but it's at a smaller rate, and that's what the discussion was about last week, and a lot of you hit the nail on the head on finding places where diminishing marginal returns set in the workplace. So that's what's occurring here. We're running out of jobs for this 3rd person to do, and when that occurs, it drives marginal cost up. Okay. And so as you might imagine, marginal cost with 4 employees is really high. Marginal cost with 5 employees is really high. Marginal cost with 6 employees is actually undefined. That kind of messes with my graph over here, so I'm just going to clear the contents. Can't calculate it because the change in output is 0, and you can't divide something by 0. Okay. Believe it or not, we actually have enough information now to answer this profit maximization problem. I'm going to get rid of this here. Click on it. Profit maximization, or what I'm going to call I'm going to make my a little bit smaller. The profit, maximizing level of output, all right, is the place where MR equals MC. This is like the golden rule of economics right here. This is probably one of the most important rules we learn in all of economics, happens to be the profit maximizing level of output. We're going to produce at the level where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Couple real quick things about that. Remember, total revenue equals price times quantity. But with perfect competition here, I don't get to determine the price, right? That's set by the market. We're saying the market says that firewood today is worth $100. The only thing I get to set is the quantity that I produce. And I get to set that by determining the amount of capital and land that I have, and then the number of employees I hire to put that capital and land to work. Okay? And so since all I have control over is quantity, that's why it's called the profit maximizing level of output. Okay? That's the one thing we can control, is how much of this stuff should we make based on the cost we face, based on what we can sell this product for in the market. How much of this stuff should we be producing? If for whatever reason we can't find a place where marginal revenue is exactly equal to marginal cost, go to the last place where marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. Okay? And so what we're doing here is we're comparing these two columns. All right? So here, when we have one employee, we've got marginal cost of $51.40, we've got marginal revenue of $100. What that's saying is the amount of money we can sell each one of these cords of firewood for is greater than what it costs us to produce, so we should go ahead and do that because we're going to make money there. And then we add a second employee. And again, each cord of firewood we cut, we can sell for a lot more money than it costs us to produce it. On these last 6 that the second worker added, that's going to be even more profit. So we're going to continue to produce. And even here, marginal revenue is still greater than marginal cost, not by much. We're only going to make profit of 60 cents per cord of firewood, and we're only going to produce an additional 2 cords with that third employee, but we're still picking up a little bit extra profit, and so we go ahead and produce it. Once we reach this point where marginal cost is $179.40 and marginal revenue is only $100, that's where we actually start to see ourselves start losing money. We aren't going to make any money based on these costs. It costs too much to produce, and if you look at that one employee adds 1 cord of firewood. So $12.45 in chainsaw expense, $6.95 in transportation costs, and then the big one, we're not able to spread out his labor over multiple cords of firewood. We can only spread that labor out over 1 cord of firewood, and so it has to bear the entire $160 labor charge. We're pretty certain now, if we use this rule here, this marginal profit maximizing level of output, where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, or if that doesn't exist, and most of the time it won't, go to the last place, and I should maybe write that, last output level, where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. And I'll change this to like a last output level where marginal revenue is just greater than marginal cost. Happens to be at this level. Don't believe me? Let's go ahead and jump over to the total revenue column and take a look. Total revenue, remember, is price times quantity. So the marginal revenue is the price. I should explain that. I really haven't spent much time explaining marginal revenue. Remember, I said marginal means additional. All right? If you think about that, if you sell 1 cord of firewood, you can sell it for $100. If you sell a second cord of firewood, you can sell the second one for $100. The additional revenue received from selling the second cord of firewood is going to be $100. In perfect competition, since we've got this perfectly elastic demand curve down here, the marginal revenue is going to be the price, the market determined price of the product. Okay, and so that's why marginal revenue is $100 at each point here. Take the total revenue. So since marginal revenue is price, we can just take that marginal revenue number times production quantity, total production. Obviously, we don't have any total revenue. When we don't produce anything, there's no total revenue. I can auto fill down. I gotta make that a little bit bigger, and you can see what the total revenue is. And again, that's just taking the price, $100, times total production. Profit, then, we're going to take total revenue, we're going to subtract out total cost. And so when we don't produce anything, don't hire anyone, we lose $75 a day. We hire one employee, we're going to pick up $168 a day. If we hire a second employee, we're going to pick up $491.60 per day. And that's because that big gap between these two marginal revenue and marginal cost, plus the fact that we bore the fixed costs in this, so we don't have to worry about fixed costs here. Now here's where we see a small, very small, but we do increase profits. All right, it's only $1.20 higher, and that's because there's a 60-cent difference between the marginal revenue and the marginal cost, and we're producing 2 additional units of firewood or cords of firewood. And so total profit increases by $1.20. So one of the things that a lot of students have trouble with is they assume that we should go ahead and produce here because that's where the biggest gap between marginal revenue and marginal cost is. And that is true, and that's where we're going to pick up the bulk of the profit. But what you need to understand is when we measure marginal cost, when we calculated it, we were calculating it on these last 2 cords of firewood, not on all of them, just these 2. And these 2 cost us $99.40 to produce, and we can sell them for $100. So we get to keep the profits from these levels of production, and then we get to add in the profits from this level of production. And that's why total profit is $1.20 higher. Notice when we go to 4 employees, profits drop. They drop by precisely $79.40 because it costs us $179.40 to produce that cord of firewood, and we can only sell it for $100. We increase production again, we drop by another $79.40. And if we try it again, we drop by a bunch this time because we bear $160 labor and we get nothing in return. We don't see any additional revenue. Okay, we're not increasing revenue any at that point. So you can see with that profit maximizing level of output, MR equals MC, right here, the rule where marginal revenue is just higher than marginal cost. We're going to hire 3 employees. They're going to produce 13 cords of firewood, and we're going to maximize revenues or profits, at that point, which is what our goal was. Right. A couple other things I want to look at, and you'll see that the graph starts to take shape down here as we enter information. Average fixed costs. I obviously can't do any averages for these, but average fixed cost, remember, is total fixed cost divided by Q. Average variable cost is total variable cost divided by Q. In this case, it's TP, total product. Same thing, quantity, total production, whatever. And this one is going to be TC divided by Q. Okay. So here, average fixed cost. So take total fixed cost and divide by total production, 5. And we get $15 in fixed costs, average fixed costs. I'm going to go ahead and autofill that all down, and you notice again we're constantly decreasing fixed costs. We're spreading that overhead out. We stop increasing here or decreasing it because we're not increasing production, and we max out production at that point. Average variable cost, take total variable cost divided by total product. Much like marginal cost, notice what happens here. We start, let's see here, I'm going to get rid of this just because it's kind of messing my graph up. We start at the same, our average variable cost is the same as our marginal cost here. That's because if you think about the calculation, it's basically the same thing. We decrease after the first unit, and then notice on the graph, it's kind of hard to see because we're not making big changes here. We decrease, and then we're starting to increase average variable cost. Okay, they're getting much higher as we move along. And then average total cost, again, take the total cost and divide it by output or quantity. And again, I'm going to get rid of this just because it's messing my graph up. And again, I can autofill all this. A couple of the interesting things, and one of the reasons I wanted to show this graph here. Oops, let me undo that, and then let me do this. Make it full size for just a second. One of the interesting things, if you recall, we've mentioned before that the marginal cost curve will intersect the average total cost and the average variable cost at their lowest points. Okay. Obviously, it's not necessarily 100% perfect here because we don't have any of the data in between, and we can't really hire anyone else. So it's not always spot on, but for the most part, it generally is. You'll see when we look at some of the curves here later on. Or excuse me, the graphs. It's a little bit easier to see when they're drawn out graphs, but we mentioned before that the marginal cost curve will intersect average variable and average total costs at their lowest points. That becomes really important for a couple reasons. One, if we can find the lowest point of average total cost, if you think about what average total cost is, it's your break-even price. Average total cost is cost per unit. So it means we're earning just enough to cover our per unit costs. Average variable cost means we're earning just enough to cover our variable cost. Okay, and so let me shrink this back down to normal size here. All right. So if you look here, the marginal cost intersects average variable and average total right around 11 units, so right at this point. And if you notice, that happens to be the lowest points of the average variable cost curve, and it also happens to be the lowest point of the average total cost column. All right. Basically what that's telling us is two things. Okay, and I'm going to get rid of some of this information down here so I can use these spots to discuss it. Okay, so average total cost equals per unit costs, right? Another term for that is break even. And so one of the things that becomes important is I can start to predict whether or not I'm going to be profitable. Even if I don't calculate this here, if I get rid of this stuff, clear contents, and I know that marginal revenue is $100, and I use the marginal revenue equals marginal cost to determine I should produce at 3 employees, I know I'm going to be profitable because my average total cost is $62.09, and I'm selling each unit for $100. I'm making $37.91 on every unit or cord of firewood that I produce. So I know I'm going to be profitable at that level. Okay. The reason finding the lowest point becomes so important is, and I'm going to go back and pull the profit in here, is now all of a sudden I can see what happens when price changes. Okay. And so let's say price drops to $56. I know I'm still going to be profitable because at $56, the marginal revenue equals marginal cost test is going to occur at this level here. Okay. Marginal revenue is just now higher than marginal cost at 11 units of output, 2 employees. And notice at $56, I'm above the average total cost. I'm only above it by like 69 cents per unit. Okay. But multiply that 69 cents times 11 and I end up with a profit of $7.60. As long as I'm above the lowest, my price is above that lowest level of average total cost, I will be profitable. Notice if I drop down below it, I drop to $55. Notice what happens. I'm now losing money. The key here, though, is do I continue to operate? Because if I close my doors, I shut down, remember, I can't just go and sell out of all of my equipment tomorrow and be out of this business. I've got a lease on this fire or this wooded lot. I've got a lease on the storage lot. I got all that stuff going on. All right, and so I'm gonna have to pay fixed costs regardless. $75 a day is what I'm gonna have to pay. And so just because I'm losing money doesn't mean I'm gonna shut down. Because it's a case between two evils, but if you had the choice between losing $3.40 a day or losing $75 a day, I'm going to choose to go ahead and employ two people and minimize losses to $3.40 a day. All right. And so that's one thing we want to watch. The question is, at what point do we go ahead and shut down? Okay. There is a point at which I might go ahead and close my doors and shut down, and that point's going to be, we go back to average variable cost. So this column here, if average total cost was per unit costs, average variable costs are going to be per unit variable costs. Okay, this is my shutdown pointer. This is where I make the shutdown decision as to whether or not to stay open or to shut down. As long as the price is above the lowest point on average variable cost curve, in this case it's $48.49, I'll go ahead and remain open. Okay, so let's pull this number down to $50. Right? It's below the lowest point of average total cost curve, which means I know I'm going to lose money, and if you look at my profit, I am. But there again, I would rather lose $58 than shut down and lose $75. Okay. Now take this below that, take it down to $48. And now notice $48, remember, marginal revenue equals marginal cost, still tells me I should produce at 11 units of output, 11 cords of firewood, 2 employees, because that's where marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. But since it is lower than this average variable cost of $48.49, I'm going to shut down, because I would rather come up here and lose $75 per day than produce at this level and lose $80 per day. Okay. So one of the parts of the reading lays out that idea of the short run supply curve being the average variable cost or the marginal cost curve above the lowest point of the average variable cost curve. And the reason we say that the marginal cost curve becomes the supply curve is because we produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Let me take this back to $100 here. That means we're going to produce at this level 13 units. Okay, marginal revenue equals marginal cost there. I can figure out at that level my average total cost is $62.09 and my average variable cost is $56.32. I'm covering both of those and I'm making money. I'm making profit. Hopefully that kind of helps to understand how these work. If you've got questions, please don't hesitate to email, call, whatever. Let me know that you don't understand. I'm going to try to get another video put together. This is Tuesday afternoon when I'm finally getting this one put together. I got a couple of things I got to get done this evening yet for some other classes. If I don't have a video up by tonight, I'll try to get it done sometime tomorrow during the day. Thank you and have a great day.